Good evening or good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jennifer Davis Carey, and I'm Executive Director of Worcester Education Collaborative. I am going to quickly turn things over to our board chair, Kate Salmon Robinson.
Thank you, Jen. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for Worcester Education Collaborative's 12th annual meeting, Learning Beyond Limits, Commissioning a New Way. I am chair, as Jen said, of the Worcester Education Collaborative, or as the cool kids say, WEC. You'll hear that a lot. As I thought about how I might ever so briefly welcome you this afternoon, two words or themes kept coming to my mind, and that is pride and progress. During this afternoon's program, you're going to hear about challenges and setbacks, many of which are daunting, as well as questions and solutions, many of which may also feel quite daunting, but all of which we at WEC find very exciting. Yes, all of it. I'm incredibly proud of the work that WEC staff, board, and network of informal advisors have accomplished in partnership with the Worcester Public Schools, city leadership, and a variety of community organizations. Immeasurable is the positive impact made on children, families, educators in the city of Worcester, all led by Jennifer Davis Carey, our fearless founding executive director, Deputy Director Julia Kilgore, Assistant Director Emily Dodge, and their team of part-timers, interns, and volunteers, as well as the current and former members of our visionary volunteer board of directors. This entire squad is dedicated, tireless, student-centered, community-focused, and most of all, mission-driven. I have deep and wholehearted appreciation, respect, and admiration for each and every one of them. None of the tremendous progress would have been possible without the assistance of our loyal and generous funders who support our program throughout the year in and year out, and who are featured in our program book, which we welcome you to take a peek at. The last 2 years have presented extraordinary challenges, and I appreciate the ways in which we've all worked hard and risen to the task of creatively serving our community in the midst of a global pandemic. I'm especially grateful for and proud of all of the devoted Worcester Public School educators, paraprofessionals, staff, and leadership, including the bus drivers, God bless them, who've all stepped up when it wasn't easy, but when the need was great. I'm also thankful for and proud of the enormous effort, sacrifice, flexibility, and patience of the students and families of this great city. We cannot forget that there has been a monumental load of heavy lifting on both sides of the education equation. You will hear more about some of the vast and varied programs with which we're involved, and you can find more detail in tonight's program and on our website, so I won't even begin to attempt to list them all. Although I do want to call attention to 3 of the areas in which significant and appreciable progress has been made. First, the growth and development of early college programming in the district has already begun to deliver crucial rewards. Early college programming not only represents incredible opportunities to prepare our oldest students for careers and further education, but they are a tangible financial benefit that makes their initial steps after graduation that much more affordable and attainable. Next is the WEC-supported Worcester Public Schools multi-year strategic plan entitled Defining Our Path. Can you believe that we're more than halfway through the groundbreaking plan's window? Do you remember some of the lofty goals we set for ourselves just a few years ago? Naming only one, I'm amazed to think of the enormous progress the Worcester Public Schools have made in the realm of technology. From our educators being leaps and bounds ahead on their technological prowess, to the dream realized of each student possessing their own device, we are way ahead of the schedule. Finally, I'm proud of the progress we've collectively made on the fronts of social and emotional learning, notably the community-wide recognition of the very real impact of trauma on learning and how it has become so critical in the midst of the ongoing pandemic. Making progress along that complicated path, leveraging our assets both in and out of school, and complementing the Worcester Public School programs has been the launch of WU Labs, a network of community-based partners that you'll hear more about shortly from Emily. These 3 areas of triumph represent just the tip of the iceberg of our collective progress for which we should all be proud. Progress in living and fulfilling our mission, progress in serving Worcester's students, families, and educators, and progress in helping to meet their needs both in and out of school. I am proud beyond measure of this nimble nonprofit organization, everybody involved, and the progress it has made and continues to make. And I know that you are too. So thank you for joining us tonight. I now present to you WEC's trustworthy treasurer, Greg Byrne.
Thank you, Kate. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. As Kate alluded to, we have a thought-provoking program for you that I know you're going to enjoy. I don't know if you realize this, but the annual meeting is WEC's main fundraising event this year. So by being here today, you're not only showing us that you support WEC's mission, but you're also showing us that you're willing to help us out. And we have a great opportunity for you to do so by participating in our raffle. We have a 50-50 raffle. We also have 4 tickets to the Worcester Railers and the Woo Sox, the Worcester Red Sox. The Railers seats are in the lower bowl of the DCU Center, so you're right just above the ice, and you'll be there for flying pucks or any merchandise that happens to be thrown into the stands between periods. It's a great night for the family. The concessions are very reasonably priced, and as we know, it's Worcester, so there's plenty of free parking. Also, the Woo Sox seats are right behind home plate in the 5th row behind the catcher. Make sure you dress appropriately because you will be on TV whenever they show the center field shot. Our seats for the Harvard Pilgrim seats are right in camera view. I learned that the hard way. Tickets for the raffle are just $5 a piece, or you can get 5 for $20. We have a grand prize raffle that we're really excited about this year. Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare has donated 2 tickets to the December 26th New England Patriots game against the Buffalo Bills. The prize also includes 2 passes to the pregame tailgate party at the Empower Fieldhouse next to Gillette Stadium. All food, beverages, and yes, beer and wine are included. Tickets for this raffle are $10 each, or you can get 5 for $40. So it's a pretty reasonable price for some fantastic prizes. Now, you can't win if you don't play, so make sure you purchase your tickets at 32auctions.com/WEC12 annual meeting. We'll be posting that in the chat, so you don't have to write it down. Also, we have the shortcut to it up on the screen right now. The raffle will be closing tomorrow at 6 o'clock, and we will notify the winners via email. Winners will be randomly drawn. So buy early, buy often, and thank you again for your support for the Worcester Education Collaborative. I hope you enjoyed tonight's program. And back to whoever's next.
That's to me. All
Okay,
right.
there you go.
Thank you, everyone, for being here this afternoon at our 12th annual meeting of the Worcester Education Collaborative. Special thanks to our sponsors this afternoon, particularly Unibank, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, and United Way of Central Massachusetts. United Way serves as our physical home down in the Denholm building and also serves as WEC's fiscal sponsor. Recently, I've heard the term inflection point a lot. I must admit, I had to look it up. And according to one source, it's a term used in differential calculus and differential geometry to refer to a point on a smooth plane curve at which the curvature changes sign, like who knew? And clearly there's a reason why I was not a math major. I continued scrolling and found another source that makes more sense for our purposes. An inflection point is a time of significant change in a situation. An inflection point is a turning point. And we are at an inflection point with respect to education in our city, our state, and our nation. Here in Worcester, we are at this turning point as a result of a significant infusion of temporary dollars from the federal government into state and district coffers from the COVID Elementary and Secondary Education Relief Fund, also known as ESSER, a change in the state funding formula, and a consent decree that will change the composition of the school committee, and a change in district leadership as Superintendent Benenda closes her memorable, notable 40-year tenure in the Worcester schools. The infusion of funding creates a once-in-a-generation opportunity for our state to not only mitigate the impacts of COVID-19, but to confront and address longstanding inequities that have for years undermined learning experiences and outcomes for students of color, students from economically disadvantaged families, English learners, and students with disabilities in Massachusetts. We're #1 for some, but not for all. For Worcester alone, this will mean over $120 million in funds to be expended over the next several years. As plans are refined beyond COVID mitigation, we hope that the following needs will remain a priority: building affirming learning environments, helping kids thrive academically, increasing educator diversity, engaging families and communities, and strengthening post-secondary pathways. The past 20 months have affected kids in ways that we are now only beginning to understand. With measurable learning loss across all student populations and profound challenges to kids' social development and mental health, it is time for us all to remember as we proceed with our work that education is the work of the full community, and that at its best, education focuses on cultivating the gifts of the head, the heart, and the hand. The fallout from this terrible disease has firmly reminded us of these things. We need to use these dollars available to build, buttress, and expand the systems and infrastructure that allow us to do this essential work. Demographic realities, the great COVID quit, and career reassessment have also impacted the teaching force. As we work to stabilize and rebuild the ranks of educators, it will be important to keep diversity and equity at the forefront. Research is unequivocal that all students benefit from teachers who bring to the classroom diverse insights, life experiences, and worldviews. It is one way to prepare young people for the increasingly globalized world that awaits them. The resolution to a suit focusing on the intent of the Voting Rights Act has the potential to create a governing body with more equitable representation, more responsive to the voice and needs of the community. As the parties negotiate a settlement, it is our hope that they balance those critical needs with the equally important need for Worcester to advance as a school district, not just an aggregation of voting districts and neighborhood schools, but as a system of schools that meets the needs of all kids seeking a sound and challenging education. Soon, our city will begin the work to select a new superintendent of schools. This change in administration, coupled with the changes in governance, will have a dramatic impact on our district immediately and into the future. With respect to district administration, it is my belief that the person selected will by necessity not only need to be skilled in the tools of urban school leadership, but to be a visionary, to see what is possible for all of our schools, for our kids, and for our community. Part of that work, I believe, will entail nurturing and sustaining the partnerships, school and community, school and family, and so forth, that add so much value by amplifying the work of teaching and learning. While the pandemic has taught us and continues to teach us many hard lessons, one valuable lesson that we have learned is the power of the education ecosystem in Worcester. We are blessed in this small city to not only have a network of schools, each with its own distinct assets and culture, but a companion network, no, actually an ecosystem of youth serving organizations, local cultural organizations, ethnic cultural organizations, and a growing municipal population that reflects the diversity of our globe. Yes, we are at an inflection point. and we are ready to continue to work together, really work together on behalf of our kids. Thank you. And I would now like to pass the talking stick to Emily Dodge, our Assistant Director. Emily?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jen. I am Emily Dodge. As Jen mentioned, I use she, her pronouns, and I am thrilled to be here with you today to share a bit more about this WooLabs initiative that we've mentioned a few times. Now, while I may be the one person presenting, let me begin by saying WooLabs is really the culmination of years of incredible effort by Jen, Julia, Kim Davenport, the vice chair of our board and the chair of our WooLabs subcommittee, and our many wonderful partners to really bring this vision to life. So this afternoon, I will tell you a bit about WooLabs, share some highlights from our summer, and also pass the mic to a few of our partners so you can hear about their experience this summer as well. Let me begin by first defining WooLabs. WooLabs is our network of partners that are seeking to advance educational and racial equity for Worcester K-6 students, specifically focused on those who have been historically marginalized. And our approach focuses on capacity building. So we work with partners to improve their capacity to provide high quality, culturally responsive, student-centered, and project-based learning opportunities in out of school time. WooLabs really recognizes that if we want to meaningfully address the appalling inequities and disparities that we see in education, we must consider and address the 80% of kids' waking hours that they are spending outside of school. So in terms of our approach, WooLabs really brings together the diverse cross-section of partners that you see here to reimagine education as an integrated system that is inclusive of in and out of school time, centers students' lived experiences and agency, and actively works to dismantle bias. Our youth-serving organizations implement our key strategies, which I'll tell you about shortly, while our higher ed partners support with professional development. Our longtime partners, the Worcester Public Schools, help us identify students and promote in and out of school alignment, while other affiliated partners and cultural institutions lead additional citywide programming and advocacy efforts, with WEC serving as the backbone coordinating entity for this work. To tell you a little bit about our genesis here, the idea for WooLabs really emerged organically from work that WEC co-led to collect community input on the district's 2018 strategic plan. Registering strong community interest in holistic student support systems, WEC's Worcester Education Equity Roundtable launched the WooLabs subcommittee in early 2020 to begin envisioning how to align in and out of school learning and develop partnerships to meet students' full needs district-wide. The pandemic then accelerated efforts by both lending increased urgency to combat the ever more obvious inequities in education, as well as motivating renewed interest in cross-sector partnerships. So next, a bit about those 4 key strategies that we employ. First and foremost, we focus on fostering the 21st century skills, critical thinking, communication that we know students need to be successful professionally and personally. We also harness student-centered, project-based learning pedagogy to foster deeper learning that is meaningfully connected to students' lives. Our partners align their PBL offerings with an evidence-based framework, as well as with state academic standards. In addition, our ecosystem collaborates through a regular community of practice to set goals, problem solve, and build our capacity through targeted training. And lastly, our system employs a research-backed shared measurement framework to ignite program quality improvement and optimized student skill development. We also recruit and train local college students called Hanover Fellows to serve directly at partner sites and support with the implementation of these key strategies, namely, as you see here, project-based learning and our measurement framework. We put these strategies into practice this summer as we launched phase 1, our pilot effort. Let me tell you a little more about that. We are so grateful that we had 5 host sites this summer that you see here, our fantastic 5 who enthusiastically dove into this work with us this summer. Collectively, we were able to serve 775 students. And while each of our partners maintained their unique approach, what they all shared was a focus on our 2 key strategies, project-based learning and social emotional learning. So for example, while African community education targeted communication, Girls Inc. emphasized peer relations. As we mentioned, another really important component of our work are our Hanover Fellows. So we hire and place these fellows at partner sites to support with site capacity building. Our 5 fellows expanded project-based learning and implemented WULAB's common measurement system this summer. And WULABs is committed in this work to build a core of local Worcester students that is reflective of the city's rich diversity. This summer, 4 of our fellows were bilingual and 2 were people of color. And as we look forward to this school year, our cohort is on track to be even more representative. As we mentioned, the partner sites all implemented project-based learning, which are hands-on, authentic, multi-week learning experiences that are driven by students' own interest, using an evidence-based framework, the Buck Institute Gold Standard project-based learning, which you see a little bit about here. So after Hanover Fellows and partners received training on this framework, fellows then led efforts to enhance their site's project-based learning. So let me give you just one example of what that looked like. Here you are seeing African community education students who are proudly presenting their end of program culminating projects. So after studying a topic of their choosing for several weeks throughout the summer, the students were all able to create their own individual final projects. The first 2 students produced posters focused on the science of a topic of choosing. So the first one you see here is on basketball, the second on Marie Curie, while the third student constructed their own mask based on the African culture that they were able to study over those few weeks. So just one example of some fantastic project-based learning in action. We hope to be joined at some point today to hear from one of our Hanover Fellows. Fatima Diallo will be joining us to share a bit about her experience with project-based learning this summer. For now, let's jump ahead and consider this third key strategy that we employed, our community of practice. So throughout the summer, partners collaborated and learned together through all of these venues that you see here, trainings on project-based learning, measurement tools and results, and understanding trauma-sensitive practices. In addition, they all conducted individual site-specific participatory action research focused on racial equity. And our last component, key strategy that we had is our shared measurement framework. So partners implemented this measurement for improvement system to gauge access, quality, student experience, and student skill development. So as you see, they collected attendance and demographic information and then implemented this 3-part program assessment system developed by the National Institute on Out of School Time that includes observations and student and staff surveys. And we were thrilled and delighted to see this summer that measurement indeed catalyzed improvement at our sites. So one example, our observation tool, the APTO, we saw substantial gains in 5 of the 13 domains that we measured there between an early and a late program observation that we conducted in categories and metrics that are really, we know, crucial to students' development and engagement in our summer programs. So foundational relationships and stimulating kids' thinking. Here to tell us more about her experience with continuous quality improvement this summer is Christina Pulio, the Executive Director of the YMCA of Central Massachusetts. Christina, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Emily. So thank you all so much. The first thing I do want to do is thank WEC for providing this incredible opportunity this summer. The timing for participation for our summer camp program couldn't have been any better, as we were changing once again and trying to remind ourselves how to promote our high quality youth development programs here at the Greendale YMCA. The Woo Labs was just such an amazing group of individuals to support this great work. And so with tremendous support from WEC and Woo Labs specifically, and the College Corps, our college fellow, we were able to do some great data collection. And we all know that that's really important, but sometimes you need support, especially this summer when we were transitioning from remote learning and kind of re-grasping and re-strategizing for our youth development programs. It was really great to have this support to look at data in such a tremendous way and be able to measure something like promoting engagement in our programs. And we saw some marked improvements because of that support, because of the observations from NIOS, because of the data collection support that we got from our college fellow, from the support that we got from our community through Woo Labs. We were able to look at our data and focus on the how. How do we continue to provide professional development for our youth development specialists to be able to engage students in a meaningful way throughout the course of the summer? And so by focusing on the data and continuing to circle that back and put that in front of our staff, who were working with students day to day, we were able to see improvements from the beginning of the summer to the end in terms of engaging staff, promoting engagement in our activities. So I am thrilled to say that we are now phase 2 with our school age childcare program, our after school program, and all the learnings that we got from the summer were able to kick off planning for our school age childcare program this year. And so we feel like we're ahead of the game. We just had our first observation for the after school program last Thursday and just continue to roll with it. And like I said, I just cannot thank the Worcester Education Collaborative enough for this tremendous opportunity that came just at the right time to allow us to continue to provide professional development for our staff.
Thank you so much, Christina. Appreciate you sharing, and more importantly, really appreciate your partnership and all of your effort, tireless effort to be one of our really pioneering organizations who said, sure, let's try this. Let's see how this goes. And I think, what you've shared today just really exemplifies the spirit of our Woo Labs partners in terms of their willingness to analyze this data, reflect on it, and then take action to improve not just the programming that they have at the time, but also to look ahead. And we will benefit so much as a community from all of that effort that all of our partners are putting in on our behalf. So appreciate you sharing. Thank you. Wonderful. So at this point, we are really excited to be thinking about how we can leverage some of what we have learned this summer as we look ahead to our school year program as well. So this fall, our network is on track to double with the second phase of our work. We are targeting students from the 15 elementary schools that you see here that Worcester Public Schools has identified as most in need of out of school time learning support. And we are projected to serve 1,000 students through our wonderful 10 host sites by the end of the summer. So have to say that, you know, I have had it's really been a pleasure on my behalf to be working with all of these partners this summer and to be continuing this work this school year. We really look forward to expanding and strengthening this cross-sector ecosystem to advance our goal of constructing an integrated system of education that both sees and supports our students to ignite and really accelerate their growth. So thank you. And with that, I will turn it back over to Jen.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Emily, for highlighting that program. We are so excited about it, particularly the project-based learning piece of it. WPI has been an extraordinary partner with us in training us, helping us to understand the concept of gold standard project-based learning, which is not just a project. It's a pedagogical strategy that allows kids to really engage in their own learning, to identify the things the areas that they would like to focus on, to amplify and strengthen the skills that they're learning in the classroom during the traditional school day, and to gain knowledge that might not be covered in the traditional curriculum while researching and going more in depth into the work that is covered in the traditional curriculum. So we are very, very excited about that. Let me also talk about some of the other things that WEC is involved in. We are host, as you know, each year we host a series of community briefings. These are gatherings that focus on a particular and timely topic in the area of education. This year we had one on early college, where we had a number of speakers from across the Commonwealth, including current students, the chairman of the Board of Higher Education, representatives from our own Worcester area program associated with early college, both from Worcester State, Quinsigamond Community College, and from the district. Upcoming, we will do more work on the funding and how the funding from Student Opportunity Act and also from the federal government will be used to advance some of the areas that we need to work on and support others that we have not had the opportunity to focus on. Last year, or actually in the winter of 2020, just before the pandemic hit, a group of us who were involved in the education ecosystem, from the youth serving organizations, our local cultural organizations, our ethnic cultural organizations, came together to create a gathering place, the Worcester Education Equity Roundtable. The roundtable has taken off, and it is clearly something that was needed in our community. WEC serves as the administrative backbone for this gathering. We meet monthly to talk about critical issues in education, do issue spotting, thinking about some of the issues that the kids are bringing to the table, that parents and families are bringing to the table, to look at opportunities and to share best practices. So it is an important gathering. Some of the work that has come from that, as Emily mentioned, is WU Labs. We've also had the opportunity to do some deep collaboration with Amy Ebbison and her work with Trauma Training Tuesdays. We were also able to do a presentation on having challenging conversations with kids. As we all know, kids are being bombarded with information and questions that raise very deep ethical and moral concerns for them. We don't often have an opportunity to have those conversations with kids. So we worked with Facing History and ourselves out of Brookline to host a workshop for educators, both in traditional settings and in out of school settings, about how to have those conversations. I'd also like to talk about a longstanding program that WEC has had, which is our Reading Together program. Reading Together focuses on a targeted set of Worcester Public Schools where the kids have been challenged to read the grade level reading requirements. As you know, the ability to read with proficiency by the end of grade 3 is an important predictor of kids' academic performance down the road. It provides the entry point for them into the full curriculum. Without that, it's like, as a former colleague said, it's like sending kids to a buffet line without a plate. And so that program allows us to distribute new books, again, that complement their classroom learning, and that also engage parents. We do a classroom activity and we work with the parents on an activity that they can take home to amplify that learning. So all of that is to say, we try to stay busy at WEC. We have a very small team. I jokingly say we have 3 type A women who sort of have to check each other on to make sure we've logged off in the evening. But there is a lot going on. We have done a lot. There is a lot to do, and we are thrilled and excited by our work. So far this afternoon, we've taken really the telephoto lens and looked at WEC and what WEC is doing. I'd like us now to transition to the wide angle lens and get a bigger perspective to look at Worcester, but also look at Worcester in a larger context. And so I'd like to begin our conversation with the commissioners and with Juana Matias this evening. So let me introduce our panel for what should be a very dynamic conversation. Juana Matias will be our facilitator this evening. Juana serves as Chief Operating Officer for Mass Inc., our state's major policy and research organization. Also joining us are Commissioner Jeffrey Riley, who is the Commissioner of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and Commissioner Carlos Santiago, who is the Commissioner of Higher Education. And with that, I am turning the talking stick over to Juana.
Jennifer, thank you so much for such a kind introduction. As you mentioned, my name is Juana Matias. I'm the COO of Mass Inc. We're a public policy, nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank in Boston, but work very closely with our gateway cities. And it's really a privilege and honor to be here with you all today and sharing the stage with our wonderful Commissioner Riley and Commissioner Santiago, 2 individuals who I admire and who I see not only show up, but they listen and they do the hard work, and they're committed to ensuring that we are really delivering on behalf of the needs of our students across the state. And I want to take the time also to just thank Jennifer and the WEC team for the incredible work you do on the ground to ensure that students in the Worcester School District are getting access to their full academic potential, that they're able to enter college and enter the workforce. And so it's a pleasure to be here. We have a full program. So I'm going to stop talking and would love to engage both of our commissioners and start off with something that I've seen you both do. You know, Commissioner Riley and I have a history. He was in Lawrence for some time and did incredible work, and the legacy of his work continues to be seen there on the ground. And Commissioner Santiago and I have interacted a lot since my time at Mass Inc. And I've seen you both work collaboratively. I've seen you both really understand that our K through 12 system and our higher ed system cannot work independently. So my first question to you both is, are there ways that we can better link learning goals across this continuum, the pre-K through 16 continuum? How might we better attend to transitions and alignment between pre-K and K, elementary and secondary, college and career and beyond? Commissioner Riley, could you start us off?
Sure, Juana. Thanks so much for having me today. I think when we think about a child's trajectory, we want to make sure that we're doing the very best for them from the beginning of their time when they enter school, whether that's pre-K or kindergarten, all the way through college and career. And so to do that well, you have to be aligned with the different leaders, and whether that's Commissioner Trewergy down in early ed or Commissioner Santiago in higher ed, we have to be working together to make sure that the handoffs happen correctly. And what I mean by that is we can't just operate in silos, but we've got to really do the work necessary to lay the foundation so there's a seamless transition from one system to the next. And Commissioner Santiago and I, prior to the pandemic hitting, were doing kind of a barnstorming tour of the colleges, trying to recruit future college graduates into the education space, because we know that we needed to diversify our teacher corps K to 12. 40% of our kids are kids of color in Massachusetts, but only 8% of our teachers. And the commissioner and I literally were doing evening events, it seemed like several times a week, just trying to get the word out that we need to bring young people of color into the teaching profession. And that's just one example of the work we're doing. We're doing a lot of work around data and life outcomes for kids. We know that if kids go through certain public school systems and then to college, they have certain educational trajectories that give them a dollar figure, how much they're going to make. And so we're starting to work on that data. And there's just no shortage of things we can do to make kind of these pipelines more seamless. But it's outset, I think it really takes, the good work of people like Commissioner Santiago being open to working with us in kind of the junior level for the younger kids to make sure it's successful.
Commissioner Santiago, anything you would share on that in
Sure.
terms of the higher ed
Sure.
perspective?
Absolutely, and thank you for the invitation to meet with you today. It's always a pleasure, particularly to join Commissioner Riley. I've tried to make our joint conversations more exciting, so I've tried to make it a point counterpoint. That old show that dates me, and it never works because we agree on so many things. So I think it's maybe less exciting, but I think it's more aligned, which for what we're trying to do is a good thing. And a couple of things that Commissioner Riley mentioned that I think need to be highlighted. One is the pipeline from pre-K to K through 12 to higher ed. He mentioned it quickly, but I think it's worth really highlighting. We have something called that we're developing first time in Massachusetts, which is a state longitudinal data system where we collect data from the littlest of the members of our communities to those that are heading out to the to the labor force. And sorry, until it's election day, close. In any event, it really is an important project. And as he had mentioned, we want to know what that trajectory looks like. We want to know the lost opportunities for students as they go from one area to another. In higher education, and I know that board member Patty Eppinger is on the screen, and we really are focused on closing opportunity gaps. And those gaps start, and I've said it multiple times, they start at pre-K. You could even go back. They start at childbirth. We see the differentials in birth weight among the littlest of our society. And when they come to higher ed, they have grown. They have, in a sense, been much more stratified. And it's very difficult for us at that point. So I'm a big believer. I probably shouldn't say this with higher ed people in the audience. I'm a big believer in pre-K. I'm a big believer in early childhood. My perspective is, I'm not going to say all the resources should go there, but we should make it easier for people to have a really quality pre-K experience. I think that would make Commissioner Riley's job a lot easier. It would certainly would make my job a lot easier as well. So there's a lot that we're doing together. I'm surprised you didn't mention Juana early college, because I know you're a big fan. But early college, you know, for college students to have an experience of succeeding in a college level course while in high school, as Commissioner Riley has shown in Lawrence and we've seen elsewhere, is life-changing. If these students can pass a course, a rigorous college level course, and that includes a school district and or a community college or state university working in collaboration, that changes their outlook. Their rates of college going are higher than other students that do not have those experiences. So those are things that were started under Commissioner Riley's leadership in K through 12, and we're happy to join him in those endeavors as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Santiago. No, we are strong advocates of early college at Mass Inc. and are happy to be a part of the Early College Coalition that's been advancing that work and supporting the work that both boards have been leading on. You guys both chatted about early college, pre-K. Is there a singular intervention that our nonprofit, private sector, public sector partners should be looking at and leveraging in their districts? And what would that be?
You know, I don't know if there's any one silver bullet. What I would say is the data on early college is fairly irrefutable, and Massachusetts is kind of behind compared to other states on early college. And we know that if kids are able to be successful, as the commissioner says, during their high school careers, taking college courses, they're more likely to not only persist through their first year of college, but also more likely to graduate. And in a system where in Massachusetts, where, you know, we pride ourselves on being number one on a lot of things, but as we've talked about a lot for years, we're only number one for some. And we're seeing second language learners, kids with special needs, kids living in poverty, not having the same success. We know that early college is as close to a silver bullet as you can get. I think early ed's one of them. I think AP is something that we're putting a lot of focus on, making sure that our kids have both access to the AP and have the funding they need to pay for the test at the end of the course. And so there's many different things that we can do within the space, but I think early college is one of the crucial ones.
Anything you'd add to that, Commissioner Santiago?
Sure. The answer is a resounding no. There is no silver bullet. There are a variety of things that we are trying to do. They come together because there's such a diversity among students, location-wise, and other considerations. We have to deal with affordability. We have to eliminate the remediation that is among the biggest obstacles to students succeeding and moving forward in college. We have to change our admissions practices. We have to make sure that transfer is seamless. We have to now, a new agenda item for us in higher education is basic needs. We have to make sure our students are not homeless and the students are not food insecure. Many of them are. So there are a number of things that really need to focus on. It's multifaceted. It's expensive. It requires intentionality in terms of our higher education equity agenda, which was launched by our board in 2018. We're very intentional about focusing on racial equity. That's where the biggest gaps are. If we can address those gaps and close them, that'll make a big difference and support all students. So it's a big agenda I think Massachusetts has, but to tell you the truth, we are really, there's a lot of focus on Massachusetts right now on these things. On Wednesday, I travel, I travel virtually to Pennsylvania to speak to the Pennsylvania state system. They have 800 people in the audience to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a lot of other states are looking to Massachusetts, are looking to what we do and how we do it to try and make a difference.
Commissioner Santiago, that's such a perfect segue into my next question that I'd love for you to both address. We know that, as Jennifer mentioned at the top of the program, and then Commissioner Riley then reinforced, Massachusetts is only number one for a certain amount of our students, not all of our students. And our opportunity and education gaps continue to exist. We see disparities between different student populations and accessing Mass Core, early college, vocational and technical education, advanced placement, and other special programs. Are there sound practices that we can increase access to these opportunities for all students, and in particular, students who have been traditionally disenfranchised?
You know, I think
Commissioner
in K to 12, we're really using an equity lens to look at many of these programs you're talking about. Early college, we certainly have a focus on, you know, I would say not just newcomers to the state and the country, but also kids living in urban areas who historically have not had the same access that other students have had, students with privilege. So that's certainly something that's happening. I think, you know, you look at what the board has done in K to 12 on vocational admissions. We're really interested in making sure that all kids have access to vocational programming. We know the demand is high, but we want to make sure that it's being done in a more fair way. And so we took that up when I first came in, and we were pleased to get a vote recently, and now that work is in progress. And then, you know, the AP pipeline is something also that kids having access to high level courses is not kind of the rule of the day in Massachusetts right now. And we need to change that, right? And so kids, there's nothing wrong with the kids. We just need to build the right infrastructure so they can get what they need. The good news is that there are a lot of federal dollars coming in that will allow us to think differently and to put more resources in this area. And it's not bad news yet, but the most important part of this is, can we execute on it?
And Commissioner Santiago, what role do you think higher ed plays in this space?
Well, I think it's essential. You know, I speak about the changing demography in Massachusetts and in New England, where population has declined. The last census indicates an absolute decline in population, but we know that there are pockets of growth, and the growth is occurring largely among communities of color in our gateway cities. So we need to focus our attention there. Commissioner Riley talked about, you know, some of the real achievements. Well, Massachusetts has the highest percentage at 65% of our population, 25 to 64, has a post-secondary credential or a degree. We lead the nation, but for us to continue to lead the nation, we need to bring into the fold those students that have been left behind historically underserved students. And we know where those pockets need to be addressed directly. So we need to focus on, for example, remediation. You know, when I came to Massachusetts in 2013, I looked at the number of students that were remediating in our 15 public community colleges, and there were 12,000. And then I found that they had to take a test. It was called AccuPlacer. And if they failed the test, they were put into a remedial class. That meant that it didn't count for credit, but you had to pay for it. And by the way, you used your financial aid. And we looked 2 years later, and we found that of those 12,000 students, 9,000 disappeared. They were off the grid, never came back to higher education. And I said, that is a loss that we cannot have. We cannot have if we intend to continue to be the education state at all levels. So we've revamped remediation, all of our institutions, public institutions, and we now look at that metric of, after that first year, what percentage of students that have taken a first year gateway college course in mathematics or in English language have succeeded. And when we were in 2013, the number was closer to 20%. Only 20% passed that course that was essential for continued college. So we made some significant reforms. Our institutions did the heavy lifting. In Worcester, we have some wonderful institutions, Quinsigamond and Worcester State, who really did some major changes. And in fact, that number now is at 40%, just after a few years of change. So those are the types of things that we need to do. And one of the things that I'm really proud of the partnership with K through 12 and Commissioner Riley is both of us focus on empirically based solutions. Don't tell us what you think is going to work. Show us that it works. And we are fundamentally focused on looking at the data reading what it tells us and following the information as best we have it.
Can I follow up with one thing on that? And I think
Please,
Commissioner,
Commissioner.
he's dead on this.
Mhm.
But in K-12, we've kind of done a disservice to some of our kids because we've established a cut score to graduate from high school, which we're telling people at the time means you're ready to go off to college. And that's not always the case. And we're in the process of revamping what it takes to be a graduate from high school. And we need to be more honest with our families. As Commissioner Santiago said, we would often graduate kids from high school. They would go to community college, but actually not qualify to take community college classes. They'd have to take the remedial classes, which was a punishment on itself. And then they'd have to use up their financial aid. And we've got to be more transparent with families about where kids are performing.
Thank you both. I think you both mentioned a point that I think is critically important, and that's accountability on ourselves, both as a state, both as school districts. And so you were mentioning evidence-based and data. What are you both doing in your respective roles, Commissioner Riley and Commissioner Santiago, to ensure that the funding that we're providing districts, the programs that we're supporting, are programs that are demonstrating success for our students? And what do you see moving forward in terms of things that you're willing to tweak and call out on to ensure that we're delivering on, the promise of all students in the state?
So we were, it was serendipity. It was luck more than anything. I would say that we were finally able to fix our funding formula through something called the Student Opportunity Act. And that happened prior to the pandemic. And when we did that, we said, okay, you're going to get some extra money, but this is what we want you to spend it on. And we laid out like 17 evidence-based programs that we thought were important. High quality curriculum materials, diversifying the teacher corps, acceleration academies, early college, things that we know work. That's what we want you to spend your dollars on. And so when the pandemic came and now all this federal money is rushing in, we kind of had the template by which to give districts to say, this is how we want you to spend your money. Do it in a way that's actually going to be impactful going forward. Because the worst thing that could be happening is 5-7 years from now, we look back and say, we had all this money, we had this opportunity to change education, get better results for kids, and we didn't do it. So I think we've given people kind of a roadmap, if you will, for how to get it done. But now the question is, to Commissioner Santiago's point, how do we execute on it?
And I think I would just add, Juana, to the question. It's kind of a different related point, which is, we have to change the cultures in which we operate. This equity agenda that we've moved forward, people will ask me, particularly from other states, so what is it that you're doing that may be different from, Lumen has designated 5 states to be states where equity is a top priority. We are the 5th to be included in that group. So I'm often asked by my counterparts, so, what is it that you're doing that's different from what we're doing in Colorado or Tennessee or Virginia or Oregon? And I say a few things. One is we are doing it as a system of public institutions. With different missions, with different boards, obviously local boards, but as a system, we're doing it at a broader scale, which I think is important. We're very intentional and we're very focused. We have had in the last 2 years the biggest growth, and it goes sometimes understated, the biggest growth in financial aid that the Commonwealth has seen in 30 years. And this is done because there's been a lot of issues focused on affordability. We took that increase, which is about $20 million, and we took it and we said, 1/3 of our financial aid goes to private institutions, but we're going to take this $20 million and we're going to target public community colleges and low-income students in public community college. We're not going to spread it. We're going to focus it on the groups that we think that really need financial aid to go to college and remain in college. So we've been very steadfast about that. But what I tell our campuses, and a number of presidents are on the screen, is we need to begin looking differently at students, not in terms of does the student meet this bar. For example, the remediation, a lot of the students in community colleges, their average age is 26. They haven't been in high school for a while. For them to come in and take a test, in mathematics is something that they don't expect to need to do. But rather than looking at whether students have met a particular bar, we've turned that around and said, have our institutions of higher education, are they ready? Are they prepared for a changing student body? If you admit a student, my view is you're responsible for helping that student get through. And many of those students that we have are first generation students who don't have the information in the household of someone who's gone to college and can help guide them through a really tough process. It is not just automatic that everybody knows all the things you need to do. I mean, for those of you that are parents that have helped your college going children on a FAFSA form, you know, I mean, you almost need a degree just to understand how to do that. So I think it is a cultural change. And in the department, we have also changed how we look at students and how we focus our policies on supporting students, not on serving as obstacles for students, but rather how are our policies really focusing on benefiting students?
Thank you both. And I could not agree more with you, Commissioner Santiago. I was that student not too long ago, although I feel like I'm getting old, where I was asking my brother how to fill out a FAFSA form. Both of my parents were Spanish speaking, right? Although educated in their country of origin, did not understand the higher ed process in the state. So I think sometimes we take for granted just the fact that certain people lack the information. Forget resources and, you know, just the knowledge of what it takes to get there and how you make the decision to go to college and all that comes with that. I didn't envy either of you. And I said this time and time again, Massing polling group, we do polling, did a lot of polling on what was happening, you know, during the pandemic, how it was impacting learning, how it was impacting families, mental health of students. And we know that one of the sectors that was most impacted was our public school systems, our teachers, our students, and we continue to see that impact today. And so one of the disruptions of the pandemic also led to increased scrutiny of the MCAS. Concurrently, there's been an interest in better using the MCAS as a student diagnostic tool, as well as alternative measures, considering social and emotional learning or school climate, for example, is also gaining ground. What do you see now or on the horizon with assessments that provides more actionable information at the student level for parents, teachers, and students for improving the school climate?
I think in K-12, we know that MCAS has been around for more than 20 years. And I think what you saw, if you look closely at the data, is MCAS had a definitive positive impact on student results in Massachusetts. We were in the middle of the pack in the country when MCAS started, and we kind of rocketed up to number 1 or number 2 in the country based on not just the test, but the standards and accountability, the frameworks, everything that went in with that program. We kind of brought order from chaos and really standardized a lot of things. And it really worked for the first 10, 12 years or so. But for the last 8 or 10 years, our kids have been flatlined on national assessments. And I think we owe it to our kids to kind of imagine what's next. We're doing an innovative assessment right now. We're working in science that's more interactive, that's less time intensive, that hopefully yields better data and is more connected to the real world. And we hope to move that out and do that kind of assessment in the future for all of our subject areas. It's going to take some time. In the meantime, the pandemic kind of allowed us to change our practices on MCAS. We cut the time of the MCAS down in grades 3 to 8 in half. We felt like our kids, yes, we needed to have some information on how they're doing, but we didn't want to offer the full suite of MCAS testing, which can be, frankly, kind of a time-consuming effort, especially if you're a middle school principal in the spring. And so we wanted to do something that was more nimble, quicker, give families some data because parents were very worried about their kids' performance, how they did, what they were lacking, give districts some data to use, but also give them some relief because recognize that what we were going through was, once in 100 years, we hope, kind of event, and that we needed to be more flexible than we've ever been before. And what I think it's allowed us to do is to really give us the running room now to think about how can we reimagine assessment going forward. I used to say to people that, pretty soon they're going to look at MCAS and they're going to look at that like 19th century medicine. Get your saw out, because the best we can do is amputate. We need scalpels, we need better tools, we need better assessments that really kind of tell us how our kids are doing on a multitude of intelligences. I had the opportunity this weekend to go see the play at Lawrence High School. There are intelligences for kids that are doing performance that aren't showing up on an MCAS test. There are intelligence in vocational schools that don't show up on an MCAS test. And we're not really factoring these things in when we're looking at the performance of children, to say nothing kind of the social emotional learning and the intelligence that comes in that area as well. So I think we can build a newer, better assessment. I think it's going to take a little time, but we've already got the work underway prior to the start of the pandemic.
Just to add to that, I think we're in, again, very much aligned. Our board has recently, among 5 major initiatives they want us to move forward this year. One is to review our admissions requirements into our 4-year institutions. And I know, Worcester State is one of the early adopters of an SAT optional. And we've now piloted it all of our 4-year institutions. Amherst was the last one to do that, and students are preferring an SAT optional approach. And what that means is you can submit an SAT score, but in fact, there's a broad array of other information to provide a more holistic perspective as to the student's strengths and other areas that they might need to build. So this sort of SAT optional, of which now COVID pushed a lot of institutions, 75% of higher ed institutions in the nation are now moving into SAT optional. We've been piloting it for a number of years now. All of our 4-year institutions have done it. The early results that we have are that it has helped diversify our campuses. Students are voluntarily opting not to take the SAT, and we're watching very closely the impact over time in terms of retention and continued graduation. So again, very empirically based, but we think this is a better way to evaluate students in a broad lens as opposed to a single unitary standard.
Thank you both. And I know Commissioner Riley needs to very shortly run, so I want to pose one last question and yield the floor to him to start us off, and then proceed to.
He always does that when the tough questions come up.
He knows the right timing, Commissioner. He knows the right timing. He preps for this. You both mentioned this in your remarks. You talked about diversifying the teacher workforce. At MassInc, we're really committed to this. It's been great to partner with Latinos for Education. We know there's a continuing wave of retirements and resignations related to both demographics and the ongoing effects of the pandemic, which have created significant teacher shortages across the Commonwealth. In addition, growing research demonstrates the value of a diverse teacher workforce for all students. Given that both wings of the education sector have a role to play in getting teachers in classrooms, what work is being done either independently or in concert to meet these needs and to incentivize new diverse teacher development? And I know, Commissioner Riley, you actively are doing research at DESE, but would love to learn more.
Yeah, so, from our time in Lawrence, we were able to kind of triple the number of Latino teachers in a 5-year period or about thereabouts. And I always thought that was some of the secret sauce of some of the positive things that happened there. We are seeing now, people were asking about the workforce in Massachusetts for teachers, and BU just came out with a study that says we've been able to kind of maintain our workforce, although I would say around the edges where we have some issues. But the one good news that came out of this is actually we've been able to diversify more, bring more candidates of color into the workforce during the pandemic than we otherwise would have. Now, maybe some of that's because of the emergency license that we brought in. We're changing some of the rules of what it takes to come and teach in the classroom. But with this kind of process that we're doing, we've given out over $6 million in grants to districts to do this work with us. I talked earlier about the work that Commissioner Santiago and I have done, trying to, really pull students from his pipeline back into the schools in Massachusetts. And I think we have a real opportunity here. We're seeing the diversification take place with our superintendents and principals, and that's heartening. But now the harder work is changing that number from 8% of our teachers to something that more matches what our student population is, which is 40%. Because as you said, one of the data is fairly irrefutable. A child of color that sees just one teacher that looks like them in 8th grade, more likely to graduate from high school and have better life outcomes. And yet rarely is that the case. And so we need to do a better job, and that work continues.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Santiago, anything to add on the higher ed side?
I
in
do.
terms of this?
Let me make sure my dog, I let, she's gone out.
Okay.
Okay, so that's what happens when you have a COVID puppy who is, take some of your time. You know, we've worked closely, and we have to work closely on diversifying our teacher corps. It's not easy. We have grants that support students when they get into the college pipeline for that. You know, it's, let me just give you, I'm always an optimist, but there's a bit of information that really bothered me a lot. It's sort of the intended or unintended consequences of policy. A colleague of mine is publishing a book to come out. It's a Harvard University Press book, and it's about the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. And she asked me to write the foreword for it. And as I was sort of getting into an issue that I had not heard of before in detail, and she's well documented in her book, you know, when Brown versus Board of Education decision integrated schools in this country from its segregated school system, which we all, I mean, I was 2 years old at the time, but we all support that in general. But there were 100,000 African-American teachers, highly qualified teachers, principals, school officials that lost their jobs. They were essentially excluded from that labor force. And I didn't know that history. And one may say it was, you know, a deliberate or perhaps a not deliberate impact of the Brown versus Board of Higher Education decision. But, you know, you wonder, what if we had that pipeline of 100,000 African-American teachers that continued to reproduce itself after a while, and we had the structures to keep those teachers? Would we, you know, be facing the 8%, you know, teachers of color statistic that many of us just find it hard to you know, to really understand, because it is so such a negative impact on our students. So you know, I wonder a lot about some of the policy issues that take place, and how we respond to them, and what are the long-term consequences. I mean, we all support the integrated school systems, but it did come at a huge cost, unfortunately, to a pipeline that we are now trying to continue to build.
Thank you both for that. As a student who went to the Haverhill Public Schools, I can assure you that it'd be great to deal with this with urgency. Never saw a teacher that looked like me or spoke my language. I came to meet my first teacher of color in college at UMass Boston. And that was the person that ensured not only that I was doing well academically, that I became a United States citizen, that I had a resume. So there's a huge impact, the human impact to those relationships that I think go beyond just the academics, in terms of people who feel invested in these students in a real way and can share a lived experience that's really, really important in understanding how one navigates life. So it's great to hear that you're both committed to this work. And I look forward to seeing what the legislature will do with pending legislation that they're considering. Commissioner Riley, are you going to be jumping off, or do I have a chance to, you know, take another stab at you with a question?
Sadly, you've gotten all your stab moves in. I've got to, I apologize. I do have to jet, but Cliff is going to step in my place if that's okay. Associate Commissioner, he's here for us.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Riley.
Okay, guys, take care. See you next
Okay.
time.
Appreciate it. Cliff, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Great. So there are questions from our audience that are coming in. So I want to make sure that we yield the floor to them and engage them in this discussion. One of the first questions that have come in is, as early college continues to grow, what is the state doing to encourage schools to add programs and important student supports? Wraparound services, Cliff, do you want to get us started?
Sure. I met with members of Commissioner Santiago's team just this afternoon, and this came up as a key topic, which is making sure that we create and incentivize the support structures to ensure that the students that are accessing early college are not just ones who otherwise would have gone on to college, but those that have been underrepresented historically. So it is definitely a conversation that we're having very actively with respect to making sure that the funding structure actually incentivizes it in both the higher ed institution physically and at the K-12 institution, and ensuring that we support the structures that exist with additional staffing for the additional students that are coming in. So it is definitely top of mind for a number of us on the team.
If I can just add, thank you, Cliff.
Please.
I think there's so much value in having staff at DESE and staff at DHE come together on these issues, and Cliff just exemplifies that. The last 2 years, the fiscal year FY21 and FY22 saw an increase in a line item to the community colleges, to the 15 community colleges, to the tune of I looked at President Pedraja, but I think it's about $17 million. And those resources were directed at support services. And we've begun to work with the community colleges in terms of the use of those funds, and it's our role as the Department of Higher Education to evaluate how effective will they be, what sorts of activities are the ones that are going to give us the most critical changes that we need. So it's in evaluation mode, but the fact that we have a bolus of resources to support services is really important for us. I oftentimes use the phrase that affordability is a necessary condition for student success, but it's not sufficient. And we are moving forward emergency grants for students. We're moving forward using financial aid to support juniors and seniors in college that may need an extra financial push to graduate, and provide them with those resources. The support services are absolutely essential. They're things that we know have worked in the past, the TRIO programs in particular, but we need to be even more focused than ever before on what is the best support structure that we can put into place. The demands, COVID has really showed a lot of the weaknesses that our support system has had. We very much are now, mental health. We have a basic needs task force that looked at a variety of things. It focused on homelessness among our students. It focused on food insecurity, but in the midst of the pandemic, the issue students were telling us was mental health. And we've now added that to an array of areas that we need to look at. So it's early, but I think the fact that the legislature has basically said they're willing to make an investment in this, I think is something that should be looked at quite positively.
That's great to hear. And I hope to see continued investments in our higher ed institutions. It's one of the areas, while my time at the State House, I felt we were disinvesting in year after year. So to hear that we're seeing increases, and that those increases are being targeted in an intentional way to support students, is very promising. We have another question from our audience. And it's, how do we encourage districts to be more transparent with data and district trends and needs so that the committee can step up to help? Cliff, would you like to get us started? I think you're on mute. There you go.
Sure. I don't know if the districts meant K-12. We at the department have really tried to encourage the use of data really from a reflective practice standpoint, that data can only help improve services for students, and that data can tell a story or help you ask the questions to get the actual stories out. So we really have focused on data transparency on a number of fronts. with respect to representation in our programs, access to programs, and also how resources are expended. We're fond of acronyms at the department. So there's DART and RADAR and CHART and various tools, though, that are based on the data that is submitted. So we're just really, we have a lot of professional learning communities as well to help districts really interpret the data that we have. Some of the data that has recently come out that we're trying to elevate is data about FAFSA completion that hot off the press that, I think we're having some webinars with counselor personnel as we speak. Really wanted to make sure that each school knows who has or has not completed FAFSA and provide the supports to get kids filling that form out. As many of you know, I just did it again for my daughter. It is a thing. So making sure to provide the support. And also another one that we really try to get out into the hands of counselors early in the year is EWIS, the early warning indicator system data, to really help counselors and school leaders and teachers understand where students are with respect to risk in terms of completing high school and going on to post-secondary. So we're really trying to encourage the use of this data and providing supports in using it.
From the higher ed perspective, I don't have to go back too far, but in 2014, and President Maloney, who's on this webinar, can certainly attest to this. The Department of Higher Education is the repository of all of the data of our public institutions of all three segments. And before 2015, before Chair Gabrielli began leading the Board of Higher Education, that data was never shared publicly by institution. And there were a variety of reasons for doing that. One is we hadn't agreed with the institutions on the data itself. So there was certainly reluctance. So we would go to a board meeting and we would show the data. We'd say, this is how the community colleges are doing. This is how our state universities, and this is how UMass is doing. And since then, we've had conversations with the campuses. We've agreed on the metrics. And you go to our board meeting now and you get data on every institution publicly. And I think this is a testimony to the confidence that the institutions, our public institutions, feel in the data that they provide to us and then we make public. We have opportunities, for example, the last enrollment reports that have come out last year in the middle of COVID. Our data showed that the community college enrollments had plummeted this year, and we provide the presidents of the institutions to come forward and explain what's going on at their institution. I think this is a healthy a flow of information. I think people understand that, you know, we confront a reality that is important for our stakeholders to understand, because that's how we will get support for our initiatives, not by holding data, but rather by making it open. And I think we're in a good position in Massachusetts in that respect. But you have to, in the Massachusetts context, you have to respect the autonomy of the institutions, the decentralized nature of our system, and you have to, by consensus, basically say this is good for our students and their families and as well. And the campuses are right there with us when we make those kinds of decisions.
That's great to hear. We have to hold ourselves accountable at every level to ensure that we're meeting the needs of students. Another question, and it's COVID related. What role, Cliff, does DESE see for our school programs for COVID mitigation and more? You're muted. Do you want me to repeat the question?
Yeah, can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, it's and these aren't curated, so bear with me.
Yeah.
What role does DESE see for our school programs for COVID mitigation and more?
Yeah,
so I think they're asking, you know, what role do school districts play in terms of COVID mitigation, providing access to testing, making sure families have access to resources?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure.
1 second. I think also the question is about out of school programs.
Oh,
How do
okay.
out of school programs factor?
Yes. Well, as we saw during during last year, during the pandemic, it was really our out of school time programs that did step up to the plate to really provide support for families that didn't necessarily have the resources or capacity, or parents who had to work to support remote learning at home. So we worked very closely with our colleagues at Early Education and Care, and particularly in our community-based organizations, to support the creation of remote learning centers. Luckily, this year, kids are back in school, but we're finding that the support that these programs have provided, as they have before the pandemic, out of school time, before and after school, and especially during the summer, remains very crucial. Luckily, the federal government has also seen this to be a priority and did provide us, I think, around $36 million extra funding this year. An RFP just went out for community-based partners to provide additional support services to support families in terms of accelerating learning as a result of the loss from the past year and a half. And we have been actively in conversation with the after school partnership and other stakeholders in terms of how we can strengthen the collaboration between districts and the providers. One thing that's come up, it's a tricky issue, but we need to look at it, is to the last question actually, is sharing data between the school districts and the out of school time providers, so that the educators in out of school time programs also have the information about what students are needing in terms of support. It is tricky because of privacy issues. So that is something that we're looking into in terms of how to support that conversation, that we consider the team more broadly beyond just the educators in the district, but knowing that for families, the team is a lot broader, takes a village. So we're hoping to continue to strengthen that partnership with our colleagues at EEC and in the out of school time community.
Commissioner, do you have anything to add to that? Sorry.
I would just say, it's a lot easier to do this in higher ed. There are fewer of us in terms of institutions compared to school districts. All three segments really came together in terms of the strategies to deal with COVID. They learned by doing, they learned in conversations as well. The vaccination policies were fairly similar across the institutions, the testing policies as well. It took us a while to get there. But I think overall, the response of public higher education to COVID, I will say, was better than we had anticipated. There was a lot of concern that the transmission would come from sort of surrounding areas, that surrounding areas would be very much impacted by what the sort of student behavior within the colleges and universities, and that would be the sort of transmission mechanism. And it turned out that that was not the case. That in fact it was just the opposite. The campuses were pretty well isolated. And could deal with outbreaks in a more concerted way than the surrounding community. So we learned a lot. I think overall, we followed the governor's rules on that, and I think everyone seems to feel that at the end of the day, it was a more positive outcome than many of us had anticipated.
Absolutely. And it took so many players and leadership across so many levels to really address the need. A couple more questions that we want to get into before we move to the next section of the program. And this question is, how do we do away with gimmicks that do not allow our bilingual students to maintain their culture and language? Instead, we have efforts to get students to learn English that are not working. Anything you would share on that, Cliff?
Sorry, I have multiple screens, and sometimes the little cursor goes like, oh, you have to go find it. Where are you? Yeah, I mean, as many of you know, the law changed a couple years ago in a direction that does, I think, allow for educators to use curriculum and methodologies that are actually can address some of those concerns. We even have a seal of biliteracy now that recognizes the strengths that our multilingual students bring to the table. You know, I would have to consult colleagues in terms of how the additional flexibility that's permitted to actually return to bilingual education approaches that actually honor the home language more explicitly are going. But what I've heard is that people are very appreciative of the new flexibility that the change in the law has provided, with the focus on being outcomes that, you know, learning English doesn't mean not retaining and honoring your home language. I'll say from personal experience that I really wish my parents hadn't done what a lot of immigrant parents do, which is they, you know, only speak English to you because they want you to assimilate quickly. And I was just, you know, probably 2 or 3 years timing wise missed out in terms of getting, you know, more of my home language. So I think that the folks in the field are definitely very pleased with the fact that there is more flexibility and that the state has taken some steps to actually recognize the great strengths that come with being bilingual.
Thank you, Cliff. Commissioner, anything you'd add to that on the higher ed?
A lot, very much similar to what Cliff has mentioned. I mean, in our new approach to seeing students and their strengths, we see multilingualism as a strength of students. And we you know, I think it was Salem State University just last week started a program, I believe it was in the health sciences and Spanish. You know, I think they understand the importance of using language in support of their students and their communities as well. So I think we will, you know, continue to see that progression. You know, I grew up, I left Puerto Rico at the age of 3 and traveled all over the world. So I was fully bilingual. You know, I lived in Germany as well for a period of time, and I was unfortunate I didn't learn much German, but I remember in the European context, I mean, many citizens have multiple languages. It's just common. And I think we need to continue to promote that and foster that here.
Commissioner Santiago, I absolutely agree. I spent time in Germany during my college studies, and they absolutely embrace being multilingual in a way that I don't think we have in the United States. I do agree with Cliff, you know, the Look Bill, which was legislation we passed during my time at the House, was a great step forward to something we've been doing really backwards. And it's, you're preparing the future workforce, right? Like that's why people are being educated. And I can tell you that every job I was able to obtain after college required me to be able to speak in Spanish, right? Whether I was a social worker, and the majority of kids in the DCF system were Spanish speaking in their families, whether I was a legal aid attorney and I was representing people who were Latino and who had barriers. So I think we need to value that more, both at a K through 12 and even at our higher ed level, because it's a strength, not a weakness. And I think we could be a little bit more innovative. So could not agree with you both on your points.
Anna, can I chime in? One other thing, it might relate to one of the questions I saw. I just put in the chat our School Finder tool, which we just rolled out on Friday, multilingual capacity, and not Google Translate, but human translated, embedded with cultural brokers that we're partnering with through the Federation with Children for Special Needs. So we're committed at this point to make sure that all of the information that we have is available in the primary languages that are spoken in the state. This is designed to help families navigate the various options, including early colleges and vocational technical education and other programs. So if we're doing our job right, you should be hearing about and seeing the multilingual commitment coming through with information we're trying to provide to families. So I just wanted to plug that while I had a chance.
No, thank you for sharing that information. So important. A couple more questions that we definitely want to get to. We're running a little behind. The next question is, are there conversations about expanding the early warning information system or creating another system that will focus on non-academic risk factors? Cliff?
That is a good question, and I'm not sure I know the answer. I will say that in past years prior to the pandemic, we started implementing something called Vocal, voices of, I forget what the acronym stands for, but it was a collecting additional information about students' social emotional learning and their experience of school, culture, and climate. The pandemic, I believe, we paused that, and I can check with the team about whether we're going to revisit that. It was administered as part of MCAS, so there were some folks who were concerned about whether asking those questions either before or after taking a test like MCAS gives you the best data. But I know there have been efforts to think about how to ensure that we're informing our efforts with data that isn't just around academic, achievement. So if someone on our team that many of you may know now, Fuentes, is very passionate about the early warning indicator system, and I will actually make a note to talk with him about whether or not we're going to try to incorporate some of those non-academic factors. I think the real issue is around the data collection in a statewide manner that doesn't create more burden in order to inform the early warning indicator system. So that's really more the challenge rather than not wanting to include those types of elements.
Thank you, Cliff.
Just in higher ed, we do have early warning systems at our institutions. They do focus almost predominantly on academic areas and whether it's attendance at a class or completion of an exam or coming in to see a faculty member, those sorts of early warning systems do predominate. I think increasingly as mental health has now risen on our level of awareness as it impacts students, I think we're going to find some additional steps that'll probably move closer to the K through 12 structure.
Excellent. And our last and final question is, should parents and communities have input into how we use the elementary secondary relief federal dollars? How is the department supporting that inclusivity, trying to bring in those voices?
Well, this is actually a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I think it is a challenge, especially with how quickly things are moving, to make sure that all voices are at the table. But the department has recently released internally, at least, a commitment to a racial equity decision-making tool, which really centers ensuring that the voices of those who are most impacted are included in key decisions, especially around things like resource allocation. We are actually about to put a RFR out to get coaches to support DESE leaders in terms of implementing that decision-making tool and practically creating structures around how to get that input. I know that in the development of the acceleration roadmap that some of you may be familiar with this past spring, there was definitely some deep engagement with stakeholder groups, with students and families, to ensure that we tapped into what was most at top of mind for those stakeholder groups. But I will say that it is a continued challenge, and I think I saw something about advisory versus substantive. We obviously do have a lot of advisory structures. But it's something I think we're really thinking about in terms of ensuring that those voices are included as part of decision making, especially when there are large sums of resources that are supposed to benefit kids and families involved. So you can check back on us to see how we're doing in implementing this racial equity decision making tool, and hold us to it.
Commissioner Santiago, any last thoughts on this topic as well?
Well, I mean, there is, ongoing, debate about the use of ARPA funds. Legislature and administration are in conversations about that. When we received the what was called the GEAR funds that came from the federal government early on in COVID-19, we were able to utilize those resources for both public and independent institutions. Our private institutions received it, and we created a formula that largely directed those funds at Pell Grant students in those institutions. So very small institutions that were heavily weighed with the number of Pell Grant students actually benefited more than some of our larger, more prestigious colleague institutions, which in fact had a much smaller number of low-income students. So we did have some impact in how those funds were distributed at the time. And we're very appreciative that we were able to make that kind of recommendation as we moved forward.
Thank you both for being here, for sharing all of this information. We really appreciate the work you're doing on the ground. We know it's difficult, especially in this post-pandemic, and we look forward to collaborating with you. I want to turn it back to Jennifer.
Thank you.
Actually,
You're
I would
muted.
really like to thank the commissioners, Cliff, Juana, and each and every one of our sponsors, especially Unibank, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, and the United Way of Central Massachusetts, and all of our guests. Thank you again. I want to publicly express my appreciation for the members of the Annual Planning Committee, Greg Byrne, Patty Eppinger, our past chair, Allison Chisholm Hanson, Don Johnson, Ron Waddell, and of course, the WEC team, Jen, Julia, and Emily. I'm sure you'll agree they've done a fantastic job tonight, a really marvelous job. I also want to recognize Patty Eppinger for her careful and comprehensive work in leading a committee and creating a strategic plan for WEC's next chapter. It's close, but not yet finished, which gives us something to look forward to in 2022. I will take this opportunity to plug the raffles one final time. As Greg described, they're great prizes, only $5 and $10 each, and help fuel the great work of WEC. Using the link in the chat, you can enter by 6 p.m. tomorrow, November 2nd, for chances to win. I thank you again for joining us for this lively and informative conversational program, but I'm sorry to say that the fun part is over. While folks are free to go, you're welcome to stay as we switch gears to take care of a little bit of board business. So I do ask that the WEC board members stay with us for a few more minutes. Thank you.